Hi Year 12, this is the next part of your coursework, which is your pre-production report, and this section is all about codes of practice. Now there are about 5 different parts to this, and we're going to do one each week. So this week what we're going to be focusing on is part 1, which is all about copyright. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through it, and you are going to submit some notes to me on this in advance of our lesson next Wednesday, which I'll talk you through as we go along. Okay, so what I've given you here is the criteria that is covered by this task. Now what you need to look at are the words that are coloured in red. So to get the pass grade, you need to explain this particular code of practice. I'll go through that in a bit more detail in a minute. You need to analyse, and there needs to be a bit of evaluation. Okay, and I'll go through that in a bit more detail on the next few slides. Okay, so for part 1, you need to do some research and do the explain bit for the pass grade. Okay, so the assessment criteria says, explain the requirements of finance, logistics and adherence to codes of practice, that's the bit we're looking at here, and regulation for planning and delivering a specific media product. Okay, now that thing about a specific media product, make sure that you're focusing this on examples that relate to TV and film. All right, I don't want you to kind of go off that and talk about things like games or any other kind of media products. Focus specifically on those, because that's what you are going to be ultimately making, so it needs to be linked. Okay, so make sure that you are explaining what producers of TV and film specifically need to be aware of in the pre-production phase about copyright law. All right, so you need to find out what copyright law is, what it involves and how it relates to the film and TV industry. How does this protect the producer? How does copyright law protect the producer, and how does it protect other people or other producers? Okay, what's it there for? What's the purpose of it? Make sure that when you're explaining copyright, you include information about the following things. So you have to say a little bit about music copyright. So basically you can't just nick any music you want and use it in your film. You need to get permissions, and you'll probably have to pay a bit of money. So for that, I would advise you to look at MCPS and PRS, which share a website, which I've put there for you below. Public domain. Part of your research is I want you to find out what that means in terms of copyright. I also want you to find out what is meant by the term fair use. It's a bit of a grey area, fair use, but I want you to have a look and see what it involves. And also I want you to think about copyright infringement. All right, so this part of it is just a basic explanation showing that you understand all of that stuff and that you understand what copyright is and what it means. Okay, so what I've given you there in the little links, the first one is a YouTube video which gives quite a basic and simple explanation of what copyright is. I think it touches on fair use and it touches on public domain, but you will need to do some research of your own and include some of your own links to show that you've done some extra stuff and you've looked into this and done some wider reading, looked into it in a bit more detail than just the one that I've provided you with there. The next one is the PRS website. Okay, so that's MCPS and PRS. You can find out about music copyright there. And then finally, the other one that I've given you at the bottom is a website where different filmmakers are being interviewed and they're talking about copyright, what it means to them, and why it's important. So that's quite a good one to look at as well. So check those out. But like I said, make sure you add your own research as well. Right, now for the analysis, I need you to also look at some specific examples to analyse. All right, so this is for a merit. And for a merit, you need to show that you can analyse the requirements of finance, logistics and adherence to the codes of practice. So obviously we're looking at adherence to copyright law specifically here for planning and delivering one type of specific media product. So this is what I want you to do. You need to analyse why copyright is such an important part of the pre-production process. And you also need to look at what can happen if copyright is overlooked in the pre-production phase. Now for this, like I said, I want you to look at some case studies. And what I've given you at the bottom of that slide are some links to websites which give you lots and lots of examples of particularly films that you could use as case studies that have been taken to court over copyright infringement things, and different cases have turned out differently depending on how that was ruled. So have a look at those, or you can find one of your own. You don't have to pick one of the ones that I've got on my list. But again, I need you, please, to make sure that you're not just relying on the small bit of information that's on those articles I've given you, but that you're actually, once you've chosen your case, that you're actually reading more widely about it. You find out more information about it, and you're presenting that information. And again, always including the links to the research that you've done personally and the wider reading that you've done. All right. So what I've given you there as well is, in order to write up your case study, I've given you some questions that you're not going to write out an answer. What you're going to do, you're going to use these as just a guide, just in order to make sure that you're structuring your writing in a way that makes sense. Okay, and making sure also that you don't miss anything out. Excuse me. So the first one, who was actually involved in the case? When and where did it happen? What was it all about? What was the outcome of the case? Do you think it was a fair outcome? And I need you to explain your answer to that. And in your opinion, could better pre-production and planning have prevented this? If so, how and why? What would you do differently? Okay, now I'm going to show you an example of how you might go about tackling this on the next slide. So what I've done for you here, I've taken a case, a very famous case actually, here, which I've written about, linked to the guide that I've given you, linked to those questions. All right, so don't just nick this example, find your own one, but this is just a kind of example model way that you might think about writing it up. So I'm just going to read this for you quickly. The two studios involved in this case were 20th Century Fox, who produced Star Wars, and Universal Studios, who made Battlestar Galactica. The case took place in June 1978 in America. So that's answered the who was involved in the case and when and where did it happen. Fox claimed that 34 ideas had been taken from Star Wars and used in Battlestar, including a character called Skylar, which was similar to Star Wars Skywalker. The case was decided in favour of Universal Studios and Battlestar Galactica 2 years later. So that explains what the case was about and its outcome. Okay, so although some of the 34 claims made by Fox may have been unfounded, I think some of them were justified. For example, Battlestar was originally going to be called Star Worlds, which is an obvious rip-off, and they must have only got away with this as they changed it before the show was released. Also, the friendly robot in Battlestar was very similar to C-3PO from Star Wars, although these kinds of things are difficult to prove in court. I think it was unfair that they got away with the alleged copyright infringements completely. So that explains your opinion about whether or not you think it was a fair outcome. Okay, that's that bit. Now, the next bit is what they should have done and what you might do differently. So if Universal had wanted to use some of the ideas they got from Star Wars, they should have met with requested permissions from Fox in the pre-production stage, and they should have kept a record of all the legal documentations linked to this. That way the case could have been avoided. If I wanted to use ideas in a film similar to something I liked, I would make sure that I wrote to the producers to explain exactly what I wanted to use, how I wanted to use it, and ask them if that would be okay. If they then asked for money to use the idea, I would have to decide if I could afford it from the budget, and I would make sure that I had a good legal advice in the pre-production stage to avoid it costing potentially a lot more later. Okay, so that's an example that you can use. That's kind of the kind of thing that you're aiming for there. Right, so the evaluation is obviously you already know this, but you're going to do a specific evaluation section later on for the whole thing, for the whole piece of coursework. But as you go along, it's nice to kind of remind yourself that you are evaluating as you go along. So all I want you to do at the end of this particular section is to kind of sum up your findings and think about how important copyright is in terms of it being a code of practice in the pre-production process. All right, so you're kind of linking, summing up of the findings and the research that you've done. Okay, so before the lesson, just to make sure that you are on the right lines, making sure that you've understood what you need to do, and making sure that you are that there's no sort of gaps in your knowledge that I need to fill or maybe do a bit more work with you on. By Monday, I would like you please to have made some notes on the first bit, which is explaining, and the second bit, which is analysing. So all you need to do is make sure that you've got some written notes, some definitions of the key terms, and also to have in mind a case study that you want to look at for your analysis and some ideas about that. You don't need to write it up in full yet. We'll do that after the lesson on Wednesday. But by Monday, along with your notes, could you please send me any questions that you have, which I can answer for you in the session on in Wednesday's lesson. Okay, thank you very much. I will speak to you on Wednesday.